The Rebbe Ois Gimel is going to explain the Shitos Harambam. The way the Rebbe explained before that the Isur of Shatnez, Kilayi Begodim, comes behemshech to the Isur Kilayi Begodim comes behemshech to the Isur of Loisachrish B'Shoir V'Chamer Yachdov, the Isur of Kilayi Behema. And the Rebbe explained how the Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi differ. What is the exact Isur of this Shoir B'Chamoir to do the Kilai? What is the Isur over there? And based on that, the Rebbe explained also Loisilbash Shatnis. So according to the Rabbeinu Tam, are two separate Gedorim in Kilayim. One is Kilaya HaKerem, in which there is an outcome. The result is a combination that is prohibited. But just an act of an external act that the Torah adds by saying Shoir V'Chamoir, the Chilai of the animals, that over there, just leading them together, even though there's no result, the Torah added that as also a prohibition. And according to Rabbeinu Tam, that's the prohibition of garments of linen and wool together, that there is no inherent connection over there, but just to put them together, even though the creation of the wool and the linen were not done combined. But Rashi learns that the Shoir V'Chamoir is not. Rashi learns that the Shatnez is also because it becomes a inner connection, because even Shoir V'Chamoir is not just an external. The act is external, but it's all made as a preventative, as a siyog, not to make harkova, not to make these different species. So it's really the inherent mixture that is resulted, but as a fence, the Torah doesn't even allow them to bring them together. As the Rebbe explained. The Rebbe is going to explain that Rambam has a different view, and also all based upon how we learn that it comes behemshech to the loy sachrish b'shoir v'chamoir yachdov, the kilayim of the animals. But the Rebbe will explain that according to the Rambam is a different approach why a shoir v'chamoir yachdov aren't allowed to be plowed together. It looks like similar to the Ramban, but the Rebbe says no. The Rebbe explains it different. It's not just because as a fence for something that will happen, but the Rebbe will explain that it's already happening here. The Shoir V'Chamoir, when you put them together, that's sort of the beginning of the Reviyah. It's not only so it doesn't come to Reviyah, you're doing something external and might lead to Reviyah, or it's a precaution for Reviyah, but this is already starting the idea of Reviyah. And the Rebbe will explain very interesting why the Rambam asks anyways, why does the Rambam say that it has to be Shatnez? The Rambam is sort of a compromise opinion between Rabbeinu Tam, the Rambam's opinion. Rambam's opinion is sort of a compromise between the Rambam and Rashi. Let's look inside. It's something which is very detailed, and you need to concentrate to see exactly the difference. So let's look inside. Gimel. Hine Rambam Kosav. The Rambam writes, Kivon shenischaber hatzemer im hapishton tzad chibur boilom. Since or when a wool and pishton get connected, any kind of connection, whatever, any connection in the world, meaning any possible kind of connection. We don't need any special connection, just any connection possible. Harizeh kilayim min hatoido. That becomes kilayim min hatoido. Now, the Rebbe first brings down the first part that the Rambam says, Ketzad, how so? And later on, the Rebbe will bring down further from the Rambam what he means. But the Rambam starts off by saying, how is the connection made? So he says, Tzemer upishtim shetorfam ze im ze v'sha oisom. So remember, we have three processes with the wool and linen. We're talking about shatnez. The Gemara says, shua, tovu, v'nois, the three processes. So the three processes in the noise had two interpretations, but according to the Rabbeinu Tam, the noise was spinning together several fibers. It looks like the Rambam also learns like that. But what the Rambam is saying in the Pashtus Loshen, the Rambam is saying that you don't need all three. If you comb shua v'tov or shua v'nois, which would mean you combed and you spun, or you combed and then you put together, you do the noise, that would be sufficient to make the garment shatnez, which would be sort of a compromise. According to Rashi, we need to have shua, tova, v'nois. You need to have all of the three processes in order for this garment to become shatnez min hatoira. You have to do the process of shua, tova, v'nois. But according to the Rambam, you don't need all of the three processes. So, and as the Rebbe will explain even further, technically, you don't even need any of the processes. Let's look inside. So first, so the Rambam says here, Kivon shenischaber hatzemer im hapishton tzad chibur ba'olam. In any kind of way you connect wool with linen, harizeh kilayim min hatoira. Ketzad, how? Tzemer upishtim. If you have wool and linen, shetorfon ze im ze, you comb them one with the other. That is the shua. That's the combing. And so the actually, it's not the torfon is not the combing. V'shoisom, meaning that you comb them. So what you had is the torfon zeim zeh just means that you connected them, you pasted them in what way? How did you torfon zeim zeh? How did you mix them together one with the other? By v'shoisom. So you only did the shaw, meaning you only comb them together. That's the first process of shaw. And you made linen out of them. You made clothing out of them. You made levadim out of them. So just the process of combing them together makes them kilayim. One of the three processes. Same thing is torfom. If you connected them by the tova oisom, the second process mentioned shor tova. Tova is spinning them. Ke'echad. You spun them together. So you may have not combed them together. You combed them separately, but you only spun them together. And then you went v'orak beged mitviza, and you wove a garment from this spinning, from these spun fibers that you spun together. You made it harizeh kilayim. So basically, that is kilayim. So the Rambam says one process of shatnez, either the shaw, either the combing was done together, the wool and linen, or tava, or the spinning was done, the linen and the wool together. And then you go ahead and you make a begem tfizeh, harizeh kilayim. Then it's kilayim. So again, according to the Rashi, you need all three in order for that garment to be kilayim, which means you need to have the combing, and you need to have the spinning, and then you need to weave it together in the garment in order to get your kilayim from the Torah, like Shor Tov. That's the way Rashi learns. And according to the Rabbeinu Tam, you don't need any of the combing or spinning. All what you need to do is weave them together, connect them after that, but not in the process of making the thread, the fibers, to get them, that they should be done in a shatus way. That Rabbi Tam doesn't need it. But according to the Rambam, it seems over here that one of the two would make it up, the kilai behind it. Sheshitas Rambam, he kimoishita memutzas, that the view of the Rambam is like a middle view between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Shemachad gisos leharambam. On one hand, the Rambam holds Sheshua Tove v'nois hu achefza de shatnes, that the process of shatnes is the object of shatnes, which means the shatnes is the make up of the word shatnes, and the meaning of the shatnes is that's how these independent material were made up. It was made in a process in where there's a mixture. So the object over here is an object that was created in a mixture between the linen and the wool. That's the object over here. And this is Veloy Kipirush Rabbeinu Tam. This is not as the Rabbeinu Tam interprets. Shezehu rak tiur sug hatzemer upishtim she'olov chal ha'isur la'arvam yachad. That when the posik says shatnez, it only describes the type of wool and flax. A wool that was shatnez, independently spun, combed, spun, and ariga, according to the, and the pishtim were separately. So that is shatnez, but they have not yet become an object of shatnez. Sha'olov chalu yisalarim yachad, over there on these two separate spun, created the fibers. They were independent. This remains pishtim, and this remains wool. The issue is to bring them together. Where do we make the shatnez? Is only in the ariga. The mixture, the prohibition becomes not in the creation, in the process of creation, these strands for the material, but just when you make the material, that's where the mixture is. That's the Rabbeinu Tam. But the Rambam learns that the shatnez is either the shua or the tova, but something of them is the creation of a kind of a strand of a the people, which is a mixture piece. Avolidoch. But on the other hand, he doesn't hold fully like Rashi that it has to be in the entire process. Rashi needs all two, both the combing and the spinning. Bechol shloishes hadvarim doesn't hold like Rashi that you need to connect it in all three areas. The shua tova v'nois, which means you have to comb it together, you have to spin it together, and then you have to weave it together. But he doesn't need these three. One of them is enough. That's where the Rambam starts. That only one connection, any connection you have, is enough. The gam shua levad havi kilayim. Just combing it is kilayim. Ulekamadeis, and the Rebbe says that to many opinions, gam and to many opinions, also just spinning it by itself. So even if you don't, so first of all, you have the shua, but the Rebbe brings down that according to many opinions in the Rambam, the Torah say, Gam Tavi Lichud, if you spin them separately, the kilayim and the shatnez and the linen, it will be also kilayim. So say that you comb them together, and then you spin them separately. No, I'm wrong. Also, if you comb them separately, but you just combine them, that you spun them together, is kilayim. I have to look up in the Mefarshim. The bottom line is it's not so clear in the Rambam. The Rambam just says shua levad, and he also says b'sha oisom. But then the Rambam says that if he connected them v'tova oisom ke'echad, that seems that you spun them together and the orag. Now, so I guess the question, you got to look up in the Rambam over there. I guess the question is, if you just do tava oisom ke'echad, so either the Rambam is just saying that the shah by itself, which means the combing by together, makes it kilayim. And then the Rambam says he spun them together. Does the Rambam mean spun them together after he combed them together, or it also means that he just combed them together? But nevertheless, the Rebbe said in the Rambam, the Mefarshim, there is a whole discussion there. But the Rebbe does say in the Rambam that the Rambam does not require all three things to make it, all the three processes to make it into kilayim. He says just shah would also make it kilayim. So the Rebbe's point here is that this too, the opinion of the Rambam, follows the verse of Leisachresh B'Sher V'Chamer as we the Rebbe learned before. Vapi Hanal, based on before interpretation. Shegidram Shel Kilai Begodim. That the definition, what defines the kilayim of the garment is nilmad mikilayim de charisha. We learn it from the kilayim of the plowing of shor v'chamer yachdov. Kivon shenemru bikro behemshech zeh. Since the pasuk tells them one after the other, yesh loymar, so we can say sheshitas harambam begeder kilai begodim hi behesem l'shitosoi, that the Rambam's defining of kilai begodim, that the Rambam says one of the processes is enough, it fits with his view in the Gedera Isur Leisachrish Goimer, how to define the prohibition Leisachrish. So basically, we're going to have the kilai begodim consistently following Loi Sachrish, the plowing of the Shor and Chamer together. The Kilai Begodim comes after the Kilai Behema. And how we define Kilai Behema, and since the Rambam defines it as the Rebbe will explain now, the definition of Kilai Behema, that follows with the Rambam's interpretation that one of them is enough. Just sure, we don't need all. That's will fit into the Rambam's view. So each of these three opinions, Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi, and the Rambam, they each follow the way they interpret the Isur of Kilai Behema, and that's how we go. Kilai Begodim follows Kilai Behema, whatever it is. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, Kilai Begodim is a whole new. Kilai Behema is a whole new chiddush. The Torah doesn't even allow an external act of connection to work with the ox and the donkey, which is just working with two different species, but there's no object that becomes one. The Torah answered that as well by saying, "Leisachre shor b'chamer." He says that Kilai Begodim also follows that according to the Rabbeinu Tam, that there's no inherent mixture of the wool and linen, just so bringing them together in the piece of wool, making the beged out of them, that is sufficient to make it Kilai. Rashi and the Rebbe explained learns that the Shor v'Chamer Yachdov, the Kilayim of the animals, is actually an inherent, even though when they plow together, there's no real inner connection that creates something, but that's also as a precaution to har revia, which would create something new. So this becomes a precaution. So the Torah asks here because something new comes from this. So Rashi learns that the show Tovinos needs to be in the original strength. The Rambam, he learns the Isur of Shor Chamer a little different in sort of a compromise way. That's why shatnez of the Begotten is also in a sort of in a middle way, as the Rebbe will explain. So first we have to explain what is the Isur of Chadisha, of Asher v'Chamer Yachdov, and then we'll see how this is associated with Revia, with the mating, interspecies mating. And that gives us an explanation why the Rambam chooses to learn, how come the Rambam learns this by Kilai Begodim. So basically, Kilai Begodim will follow Kilai Shor v'Chamer. So now let's explain what's Kilai Shor v'Chamer. The Hine Harambam b'Meir Nevuchim Kosav. The Rambam in Meir Nevuchim writes, She Tam Kilayim Decharisha. He says the reason for Kilayim of plowing with two species, different species, who ki'im yikabetz ben shneim, because if you gathered these two between them, pa'omim yarkiv echod behem al chavedu. So sometimes you may also mate them one on the other. So it seems almost the words of the Rambam, if you covet, seems almost just similar to what we brought down before from the Rambam. Ulefum riyato, as you run with this words of the Rambam, it appears shazeu al derech divrei Rambam hanal, that this is similar to the words of the previous Rambam. She isur kilayim the chadisha hurak syog la kilayim darba, that the isur of this mixture of plowing with the different species is only a precaution against grafting them, mating the different species. But the Rebbe says no. In the Rambam, it's not just a worry of something else would happen, but it actually begins to happen with bringing them together, the Sherech Hamer. Yesh loymar, but we can say Sheledas Rambam, that according to Rambam's view, ha'isur de leisachrish goimer hu siyog leisur beviyah, that the isur of leisachrish is a fence for isur of reviyah. Not only this may lead you to the other, its offense is not because it may lead you, but because this is the beginning of the process. Not only just because, in actuality, the act of plowing yardov, to plow the ox and the donkey together, yochel lahavi lirevia, it can lead you to this mating, the inter species. Elo gam mitzad atir dimyoin betoicha. But there is also a similarity of bringing the animals together to mating them together. Sheyesh bishtei ha'pa'ulos, that there is a comparison. These two acts of bringing them together as very similar to mating them together. Harba, the two acts of harba, mating them, v'charisha, and plowing yachad, are very similar, and it's not just going to lead, but that itself is sort of like the reviyah, which the Torah prohibits. Charisha is very similar. Nesru charisha yachdom agav reviyah, and that's why this plowing has been prohibited. When you plow together the ox and the donkey, is because mating them is prohibited, and this is a very similar act. The Rebbe explains. The hine isur harba asmei yesh lefarshe b'shnei ifanim. We have to first understand and figure out, why is this harba, mating different kinds of species of animal, what is the prohibition? Why does the Torah prohibit that? Is because of the result. In other words, if you'll have a child, you'll have a baby, you'll have a birth of a mixture over here. So it's the result that is the problem with harba, of mixing the species. But really, we can say also It's not so much about the results. It's just the mating together of two different species that the Torah doesn't want. For two different species to mate together, not because of the results, just in the mating itself. And that's why the same thing we will apply later on to the garment. Let's look inside. So the Isur Harbo Atzma Yesh Lefarshe B'Shnei Efanim. The prohibition of mating different species together, we can explain in two ways. Aleph, number one, Ikero Isur Hu Biglal Hatitzo Mizeh. The main Isur is because the result, what's going to happen? Haylodas mean Achar Chodosh. You create another new kind of mean, that a new type that wasn't there before. Nasem Narkovash Ne'aminin. When you graft, when you mix two kinds, you get a third. Ufizem, according to this, Kilai Harvo Hem Bedugmo Besug Gim Kilai Hakerem Kilaim Drizira. In that case, then this is similar to the Kilaim of the orchard, where there is something new comes out from this mixture. Sheikrom, what is the main prohibition over there? What's the main concern when you mix the growing things? Pentigda Shamaleya, the Rebbe brought down before. Over there, the result, what comes from Sheikrom Mitzada Taruves, that it's mainly because of the mixture. The min achar chodosh tzomach mizeh, because you have another kind of a type that grows from this mixture. As the Ramban on the Torah prolongs the problem that you creating something new which wasn't inherently in nature by mixing two separate species of growth, of sowing different things together or sowing in the orchard. So that's one way. So, but according to that way, so then for sure, kilayim decharisha hu besug v'geder. And so the mixture, when you plow, is in a different category. It's a different definition over here, because by plowing with an ox and a donkey, you're not creating anything different. Because over here, the only mixture is in the act that you're using two different species together, but you're not creating something new. There's nothing new here. So it's a act that you're doing in a mixed way, but it's not the result. So according to Zeh Isur Charisha, Hisyog Liisur Rivia. So this that you're not allowed to plow because it may lead you to the grafting, as the Ramban said before. Hurak mitzad zeh shebepoyil yichoyla acharisha lo'avid l'dervo. That is because, practically speaking, you're not doing anything when you bring the ox and the donkey together, because there is no results in this, and the category, the definition of that kilayim is like by growing when something new comes about. But here there's nothing new, and so why is it prohibited? So there's a new category, the category even when you don't, just the act together. And the explanation, why does the Torah prohibit that, is because this act could lead to something different, which would be harba, which would be grafting. That's one way. base. The other explanation is Gam Isur Kilayim Daharba. Also, we're going to say that the prohibition of kilayim that you have when you mate the different species, einay mitzad hataruves sheb b'min hachodesh hanoitzeros. The prohibition is not because of the mixture that there's something new comes out from the harboa of the shoyd and the two different species. Ela inyan haharboa hu mitzad ha'pa'ula shel taruvis shnei aminim. But the idea of prohibition of the harboa is because of the act of mixing two types. Ukumoishen is baer b'mokum. And I explained it elsewhere. That we see that lahaloche, nothing happens to the new creation that was created from this mixture. So let's say what happens if you intermix two different species and it gave birth. That baby that was born from that mixture isn't even Asur. The Isur by Harbo is also not the result of the Isur. The Isur actually doesn't do anything to the result. The result is Mutter Ba'anoah. But the Isur is the act. So, as the Rebbe explains, Gam mitzad beis. Gam Isur kilayim d'rabo eine mitzad taruvis shebemin hachodesh hanoitzeros. Adin rabo mitzad ha'pa'ula shel taruvis shnei minim is just because of the act of 2 minim. Ha'pa'ula shel taruvis shnei minim. Ukebeshnesbar bokom achar shenifska alocha. As explained elsewhere, the alocha has been ruled. Kibeshekos of Harambam. The Rambam writes, Muter lahachnis shnei minim l'sahar echod. You can bring in two species into one stable, one area. If you see them mating one another, it's not your responsibility. You're not required to separate them. Further, the halacha is even if you are the one that goes ahead and you made your animal mate with the other one, the one that is born of this mixture is mutar b'anoah. So when is the Torah give you malchus for harboah? So it's only if you handle it by hand. You do the harkova, you do it with your hand. Mashma. So it appears from there that the gather isur kilayim harboah al derech halacha. What is the revia, the harboah, to mate them al derech halacha? Eina beglal hatol d'shen elodim hem. It's not because of the babies that are born, because of the new birth, because that's not even also. And you don't even have to stop them. That's not easy. Elo. Mitzad esem ma'isa harkova v'harboah is the fact that you ride the animal on the other one. You make them mate, and you're mating them. That act is also b'harboah, not the result. So now let's take this to the plowing. So plowing of the ox and the donkey. So according to this, we can say the kilayim the charisha who be'oisa hasug me'ein hageder the kilayim, that the kilayim, the mixture of plowing together, is in the same category of the harboah. They're very similar. How so? According to the second way, that the act is Kizeh, it's not the result. The Kizeh shenesra charisha yagdov. The fact that the Torah prohibits plowing together, umishum shezehu ke'ein hascholo shel pu'ulas hachibur shel shnei haminim. This is sort of like the beginning of the act of connecting the two kinds, bringing them together. Harbo is bringing these two kinds together, not the resulting, what the birth will be, but the bringing together. So this is the beginning. You're bringing together by plowing them together. As the Rambam quotes in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rebbe said that when you bring two species together, this brings to the fact so sometimes you bring them together. So one of them will ride the other one, meaning it will mate the other one. So therefore, this is already the beginning of the act of Reviyah. So what does this mean? So the Shitas HaRambam, according to the Rambam's view, Zeh she'osra Torah kilai charisha. Why does the Torah prohibit it? The kilayim of plowing, of mixture, ulifisha isur hu bepu'ulas hachibur, because the isur is in the act of connecting them. Avol li'idach, but on the other hand, not just connecting externally, it's not that the Torah just on its own connecting pieces is inherently by itself asur would be elulifi shaheim begeder kilayim deriv harba, but because this becomes defined as harba, bezo iker ha'isur, and this is the main part of the isur, even when you're plowing, is kasher pu'ulas achibur yesh bo harkova harba dishnei minim, when the act of connection has a harkova, a mating, a riding, and a revere. That's the way they mate, they ride. That's what's called harkova. Revo dishnei minim, of the two kinds. The Torah doesn't want a act that creates this kind of an inner connection, intimacy, a revia. Torah doesn't want, and that's the idea of charisha. Even though charisha, they're just plowing, there's no. But since sometimes this leads to that's the beginning of bringing them together, and you are leading up to, the Torah doesn't want you to do the charisha, because inevitably your charisha leads to the harkava, or is the beginning of the harkava, which is in itself, charisha has no connection, an inner connection like Revi and Harkova. It's just external, but it's part of, it's the beginning of. That's the idea the Rebbe learns in the Isur of Leisachrish, B'Sher Chamer Yagdov, because it sees like the Reviya, it's similar. So now the Rebbe says, Kilai Begodim follows Kilai of Leisachrish B'Sher Chamer Yagdov. So based on this, we can say, Shalishitosei Ozil, we can say that the Rambam actually goes according to his view, Gam Bikile Begodim. Also, when it talks about the kilayim by the garments, which is similar to this Shoyer V'Chamer Yagdov, which comes a hemshech to. Gam Shehem It's part of this category that has these two ends, the two extremes, the two sides. Geder ha-isur, the defined isur, according to Einei Rak Tziruf, it's not just the Torah added an isur with the Shoir v'chamoir, just combining them together, not connecting them, but just bringing them together. Einei Rak Tziruf kedas Rabbeinu Tam. You bring together Shoir v'chamoir, there's also, it's a new gathering kilayim. That, no, according to the Rambam, el tzorich liyas chibur shnei minim ba'asiyosam. You need to bring these two species together in making them kilayim. Abel li'idoch ein achibur tzorich liyas be'ofen. But on the other hand, the connection doesn't need to be in a way nasim chefza achas mitchilas haviyosam the pishtim, that they both need to become like one object from the beginning. When they make them into tzemer b'pishtim, the garment of tzemer b'pishtim, that every process needs to be together. Until they become one garment, every part of that process that you can't tell that they're separate, they become totally one. Like Rashi, no. Elo, dai, according to the Rambam, sheyiyeh ezet tzad chibur beineim. There needs to be some connection. There's a difference between tziruf and chibur. Tziruf means just bringing them together, putting things together. Chibur means a connection. There needs to be some sort of a connection between them, means an inner connection between them. Al derech sha'atoira osra pulas hacharisha yachdo. Similar to what the Torah answers the charisha, which the Kilai Begotten follows. Av she'en kan harkove mamish, even though there is no actual harkove writing on the making that mating. Kivon shezuhi ke'ein hascholo shalarbo kinal. This is the beginning of that revia. So that act of bringing the shoir and the chamer together. So the Rebbe is mechadish that the Rambam needs more than the Rabbeinu Tam, which the issue of Shoir v'chamoir is just doing things together. So Kilai Begodim is also, they're totally separate. You just wove them together. Rabbeinu Tam answers no. The Rambam needs, there should be an inner connection. Because according to the Rambam, the Isur of Charisha is not just an external act. It's similar at the beginning of Revia, which is a inherent connection. And therefore, the same thing is required by the Beged, in order to be Kilayim, it's similar because it's the beginning of connection. Some sort of a connection over here is already also prohibited. And the Rebbe explains this now, explaining the whole Rambam, because it seems like the Rambam himself will say that any kind of connection really would be asur. So why does the Rambam insist, or why does the Pasuk insist on Shuah Tov V'Nois? and that it needs to be a mixture from the beginning, when the Issur would be regardless. So the Rebbe explains, "V'zeh meduyek b'divrei Rambam." This is very precise in the words of the Rambam. She'ein she'af shekosav b'tchila. That even though he writes in the beginning, so he says like this. Seems kivon shenischaber tzemer im apishtim, as we quoted before. Once the wool with the pishton has been combined, sad chibur ba'olam, in any kind of connection, whatever it is, harizeh kilayim min ha'torah. That would be kilayim ha'torah. Mikol mokoy mamshich. So it seems that you need some sort of connection. It's also kilayim. So why does he say that you need to have it together? Mamshich ketzat tzemer upishtim shetorfim yachad zeim zeh. How so? You need to combine them together, b'sho'isam, and you comb them. Also mehem levadim, and you made harelu kilayim. Or he said torve v'tova. You connected them together and you spun them together. And then you wove a garment from this spun material strands. How is that kilayim? That is kilayim. So if any connection in the world is sufficient, why does he say that you have to spin it together? Why does he say you have to comb it together? The Likkutei, it would seem, Kivon de min ha'Torah nesar b'chol tzad chibur ba'olam. Since min ha'Torah it's also any kind of connection, ukvi sherech ba'alocha shel achrizeh, as he prolongs in the following halacha. The Rambam says any kind. So why do we need to spin it together? Any kind of connection would make it awesome. So why does the Rambam write that it's spun together? The Torah, so we see kivon de min haTorah nesar b'chol sad chibur ba'olam. Since min haTorah it became prohibited, any kind of connection. And then the Rebbe quotes from the Rambam later on. The Rambam shows you how every connection of the wool and the linen will create kilayim. So why does the pasuk emphasize that it needs to be combed together? Or shua, top of a noise, why does it emphasize that? If everything will be kilayim. The Rebbe quotes now from the Rambam, what the Rambam says, in either case it will be kilayim. The Rambam is ma'il baloch shachar that tofar beged, if he sews a beged tzemer b'shel pishton, a garment made out of wool and made out of he sews a woolen garment with flax, meaning the thread that he takes, the garment is just a wool garment, but he uses the thread, he uses linen thread on a woolen garment. He sews it with linen thread. Even if you sew them with silk. So if here is talking about you have a woolen garment and you have a linen garment, and you sew them together by using silk thread. So what connects these two things? Silk thread. Tofra Memesh. Or Shetofat Beged Semer B'chuta Pishtim. This is the second case is you're sewing a woolen garment and you're using the thread made out of linen. Oy Beged Pishtim. Or you're sewing a linen garment and you're using Chutei Tzemer, you're using the woolen thread. Oy kosher chutei tzemer b'chutei pishtim. You're making a long string, so you're knotting the wool strings to the strings of the pishton. Oy godlon, or you threaded them together. You were together. Vafilu nosan tzemer upishtim besak oy bekupa. Even if you put the wool and the and the linen, you put it into a bucket, uh sakabukupa. So you put it into a bag and then you wrap it. Harelu kilayim is kilayim. Vafilu kosher gedil shel tzemer begedil shel pishton. So you have a thread, you have a bunch, a spun of wool on of flax, two separate. You tie them. Afal pi shaharitzua be'emtza, even though the strap is in between. So, so in other words, not something connects these two pieces, the linen and the wool, with a strap that goes in between. Same thing if you folded over garments of wool and linen and then you tie them. That semer pishtim, either way, whenever they're together, once they were together, united, then it's awesome. So since that's the Isur, Lama Mudgash Bekosuv, so why does it emphasize in the Pasuk, Shavai Tove Vinus? So why does the Pasuk tell us that it needs to be combed together? There's nothing to do about the combing, it's just to bring them together later on. Why does the Torah say that the combing is shatnez? Which would be the first example that when the Rambam starts it off, he says, the torfam zeim zeh v'shoysom, that you brought them together by doing what? By combing them. V'asomem levedim, and then you made the linens out of them. Shebe dugmazu, in this example, klolus asiyas habeged. So there, the general, this whole garment to begin with was made through species. If there is no requirement for if there is no requirement for the creation of the garment to be out of the mixture, and that's kilayim, why does the Rambam, as the Rambam writes, in any form would make it kilayim? So why does the Rambam give this as the first example, what the Torah says? Elo, but the Rebbe explains, Kiledas Rambam kilai begodim hem bedugma kilai behema. According to the Rambam, the kilai begodim are similar to kilai behema. U kemoi bikilayim de behema, and just like by the kilayim de behema, afsha isur hugam bikilayim de charisha, even though over there, not only in harbo, not only to mating them, but also plowing them is also. There is no inner connection, they're just separate. But still, what's the main definition? Who kilayim darbo kinal is because of the kilayim of this mixture. Similar is also by the kilayim of the godim. The afa isur kilayim and atayra He kasha nischaber b'kol tzad chibur boilum. That the kilayim in a Torah, whenever it's connected, whatever, just like the shorach hamoyer are not allowed to by kilayim of animals, any connection. Mikol mokem, iker hu kasha yesh chibur pnimi. Mainly is when there is an inner connection. Shezehu kasha torfam zeim ze v'sho oisom v'osom mehen levadim. That's what they make when you make them levadim, when there's some sort of an inner connection, when they were built to Melachatchila, but while it's also just a Shorach HaMoed, because it leads, or it's beginning of the Arba, it's also to connect any Beged, the Lovash, a Beged Sever, and a Beged Pishtim. But the source of it is because of the creation, because it's part of an inner, the definition still remains the inner creation of the Kilayim. There's a lot of detail here. We have to go over this a second time really well, because there's a lot of halachas here. There's a lot of fine points. The way the Rebbe explains the view of the Rambam. So the Rebbe says that the charisha that says before the kilai begodim is connected to the reviyah. But according to the Rambam, the way the Rebbe connects it, that the main issue over there is not the result, it's still the act, but it has to be an inner act. It has to be a reviyah kind of an act. And that is reviyah. Charisha says putting them together even without that, but that act is the beginning. It's sort of almost mating them. That's also it's enough. And the garments kilai begodim follows leisachrish b'shoy v'chamoyer is also similar. That's why it needs some inner connection, which would be the shua, which the Rambam says that's the main idea. But in actuality, any combination b'chol tzad, and that explains why the Rambam, even though he says b'chol tzad, there yet he starts with the shua. Why does the pasuk tell us about combing them together if it's had nothing to do with that? No, but that's the beginning. Bringing them together is like the shor v'chamer, which is the beginning of the harva. Okay, it's very fine ideas here. It says we have to do this over again. But let's conclude the Sicha with previous inyanim. Yesh levayer, hey. Yesh levayer pluktus Rashi v'Rabbeinu Tam al derech hachakira v'hadrush. Can explain the machlokes of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam that we said before. Is it a different category, or is it leisachrosh shor v'chamoyer according to the Rabbeinu Tam? It's a different category, a prohibition even when they're not connected. And Rashi learns it's still because of the connection of the harabah that comes from it. ובהקדם, שמצינו חילוק עיקרי בין כלאי בגודים לכלאי זרועים. We find a major distinction between the kilayim of garments and the kilayim of zroim, and kilei begodim, lekilei zraim v'kilei behema. There's a different kilayims. Godim, you're not allowed to wear. There's no isur in the kilayim itself. By kilei zroim and kilei behema, you're not allowed to you're not allowed to create the kilayim. So behem nesra etzem asiyas kilayim. Over there, just making the kilayim is prohibited. Zriyas kilayim bekarka, to sow the kilayim in the ground. V'chein harkovet shnei minim, and also the mating together two different species. So that the prohibition is on the act itself. Noisef, But that's in addition. Uh, so there is the actual revia of mixing the two animals, but that's in addition. That's in addition to not the ox and the donkey together, which is not it's just the act of of leading them. Mashen can be killed begodim, but as opposed to killed begodim, nesro rak levishas shatness. So over there is just dressing of the shatnez. You can't wear v'loy etzem asiyas beged shel tzemer pishnim yagdo. But making a garment of tzemer pishnim, there's no prohibition. Yes, Levar Tamachilu will explain the difference for this different distinction. The kilai begodim shoynim kilai zeroim v'kilei behema bazeh. What's the difference that the kilai begodim from kilaim of growth and animals? Shekilai begodim achiburu mishnei sugim shoynim. By begodim, the mixture is two different categories. Suga chai b'tzuga tzemeach. You have the living category. The wool comes from a animal, and the linen comes from a tzemeach. The tzemer umibalcha, you pishtim tzemeach. The wool comes from a living, and the animal, and the flax comes from growing. Therefore, there cannot be really, in their essence, two categories. In their essence, you cannot make their a real mixture. You can't mix them together. Their connection is merely a external connection. As opposed to by kilayim zrom kilayim sug. They're two same category. Either you do shnei minim shel tzemeach or shnei minim shel chai. Two categories of growing things, different growing things, but two categories, or two categories in living things. Hadei shom hatarubes he b'mtziusom. Over there, it becomes their in their essence. Mikoyach hatzmiach mikoyach ha'iloda shalahem. In the power of growing, they grow together. In the power of birth, you actually you make them together. You bring them together, but you can't bring together two different categories, linen, really in their essence. Therefore, only when we're talking about the mixture of the growing things and nesra gam etzem asiyas hatarubis. So with there, just making that mixture is prohibited, because that mixture becomes in their entity, in their existence. As opposed to kilayim by begodim, the semer of pishno tzava wool and plavlax it's impossible to mix them in their essence of their existence. The making of the mixture is not prohibited. Elorak levishas beged hanasim is only wearing a garment that is made from this mixture, because you can't inherently mix them, but you wear them from that mixture. Yesh loymar. So you can say Shezeu tam shorabenu tam, that this is the reason for the Rabbeinu Tam she'isur shatnez sugam kshe'ein taruvus gemura b'shoyu tovim v'nois, that the isur of shatnez is also when there is no complete mixture, that all parts, the kivon she'isur shatnez eino elo al levishas hashatnez, since the whole prohibition is only on wearing the shatnez, v'loi al asiyas hataruvis, and not on making the mixture, the tzemeru pishtim, yagdov, shelo shayich sheyiti yitruvis amiti, cannot be real tzemeru pishtim kanal, mistaber loymar. So therefore, it's logical to say shemaspik chibur chitzoni, that it's sufficient an external connection. Is anyways not an inherent connection. So a chibur chitzoni is sufficient. Arigas at separate pishtim, to weaving that separate pishtim. They lesser al vishu begedzu to prohibit dressing up in that garment. Ubisvaras Rashi yesh lemer, and Rashi's idea we can say the afal pi she'ein bikilai begodim taruvus betzam amasias. Even though that in the kilaim of garment, there's no mixture in their essence of their existence from the two categories. Mikomoken kasher betchilas asiyosam nasu biyachad, because when from the beginning they were made together, misrikosum adarigosum, from the time they were combed until they were woven. Yes, al kolponim dimyan letaruves the kilizroi mikilabehema. There, at least minimally, there is a comparison, a similarity to the mixture of kilayim of zroim and kilayim behema, because you made it from the beginning on. You were mixing them. That's why these kilayim were asur, but it needs that condition. Behu k'moy syug l'shar ishfanei kilayim. This becomes like a fence, a precaution for other levels of kilayim. That it's only for distancing, which means just to stay away from kilayim. But in essence, by begodim, you don't really have kilayim. But Rashi learns that if from the beginning you made it together, it is like kilayim, and it's used as a precaution not to do any mixtures, even though the mixture cannot change the mitzvah. So because of the two different categories of a chai and a tzemeach. Kivon shebepoil ein basiyas shatnes taruves be'etzem hamitziyas. But yet, since in making shatnez there is no mixture as a mitzias, lenes Rashi tziyas hashatnez elo rak halevishuboy. So that's why the making the shatnez has not been prohibited, only dressing up, and that's the explanation why by begodim there is no isur on making them, because you're really not doing anything, but to an extent, but yet to put them on, it's a harchoka from all the other kilayim that the Rebbe explained. Vov, v'apima shekos v'rambam, based on what the Rambam writes, shekola mitzvahs haTorah nitnu l'saken hadeus hulu, that all mitzvahs of the Torah were given in order to fix and put our minds correctly. We can say there is a hint and there is a lesson in the surface of man. The fact that only by the kilayim begodim there is enough, only the dressing was prohibited. Yadua, it's known, the powers of the soul by the person, they're divided into four categories to correspond to the inanimate, growing, and living, and speaking. The tzemeach what is the tzemeach in the soul? Those are his emotions. The Chai, who has seichel, the living in the person, is the intellect. Is explained in many places. Zehu haremes bekach, and this is hinted with the shleinesra siyas beged shel shatnez, that Torah doesn't prohibit making a garment of shatnez. Ki adrab, zehu ki adrab, because on the contrary, not zehu mashlimus, zehu mishlemus ha'odom. This is part of the wholesomeness, the completeness of a person is that his powers are included one from the other. Shahaseichel mashpia lamidas, the seichel influences the emotion, lamidas hem liferach haseichel, and the emotions are according to the seichel. And when does the Torah prohibit a mixture of two species? It's only when through this mixture misbatlim hagdorim That's only when the mixture creates a situation that it negates the boundaries and the special characteristics of kol koich of each koich. Al derech kilei zrai mikilei behema shenetzer min chodesh. Only in those cases there are new koich. So, but that would be on the regular. Aber mekomoka also lil b'shabbos. You can't put on shatnez. So shatnez to have them, it's a compliment because they complement each other. But to wear shatnez, ki levushu inyan shel makir. Levush is a surrounding. That comes from the surrounding powers of the soul. That's the power of the will and the delight. That avodah is that all aspects of the person, they are surrounded and they're penetrated with this rotzin or this tainuk, like the garment of person that surrounds the person. Sometimes you have a garment that can cover the person, majority, almost the whole person. When the avodah is in such a way, oz efsher shetiya shtaruvis shel shnei mini koiches. Then you can't have mix of two koiches. Ki kasher ha'odam bechlolus osuk v'nitvas ba'oifen echad shel avodas havaya ad sheze makife kula. Because when a person is occupied and gets caught up in one way of these service of Hashem till it totally encompasses him, efsher sheyiyah osuk. It's impossible that he should occupy himself b'shas ma'isa, that at that same time, v'gamkin b'oifim shel makif, and also in a makif way, hatoifis as kula, which would also surround him b'derech sheni, b'dover sheni. So you can't have these two things when you are dealing with the makif and the person is totally surrounded by it. L'chein mazir hakosuk le'silva shatnes. They don't dress up shatnez. When we talk about the level of the surrounding of the nefesh, you have to occupy yourself in all categories of service by themselves. Over there, you can't mix wool and linen together. When we are talking about the avodas makifim, levushim, you can't put them on. In the pnimi is fakert. You need the different things for one of that shleimus adam. And that's why the Torah's prohibition is only not to wear them. This is me. Sichos Shabbos Parshas Setzei Tovshin Mem Aleph the Rosh Chodesh Elu Tovshin Daled Mem.